It's been about 8 months since the release of Honkai Star Rail, and every 5-star you've wanted to pull, they're imaginary. There's no way that you don't have E2 Himiko and Yensheng right now on your free-to-play account. The limiteds may as well not exist. Your Stellar Jades? Imaginary. Your amazing Relic rolls? Imaginary. Your next 5-star? Well, it's Ruan Mei. But also imaginary. Literally, you're getting a free imaginary 5-star. Hoyo really said L plus ratio to Genshin Impact because in less than a year, we've gotten a free 5-star limited character. We've been asking for a free 5-star standard character in Genshin for what, 3 anniversaries now? Anyways, that's not what this video is about. Most of us are excited to get the man with the doctorate in Twitter beef, but some are pretty skeptical. After all, how good can a free 5-star be? Well, today I'm going to briefly cover what Dr. Ratio does, if he's good, and how you can prep for him. My name is Braxophone, and let's talk about Dr. Ratio. Aside from this man appearing to have a body sculpted like a Greek statue, wait a second, he's an imaginary Hunt character. So there's a couple problems with Hunt. One is that most of the content in the game isn't single target, and 2 is that Hunt characters so far haven't been scaled to be competitive with their single target damage against destruction units. Sure, in the right situations, Hunt characters like Seele can pull ahead of Jinglu and Dan Heng, but it's very unlikely to happen, especially all the time. Dr. Ratio will likely suffer from a similar issue unless his damage is so high that he can outdo destruction characters into targets. With that said, Seele has never been unable to clear the hardest content in the game, since their damage is still very high in general, and I have no doubt that Dr. Ratio's will also be solid, even though we don't have any multipliers at the moment. This problem also disappears if Hoyoverse starts putting one insanely high HP boss in MOC instead of just 2 decently high HP bosses. So my personal assessment on Hunt characters can be derailed just by a change in enemies in the Memory of Chaos. In general, being single target isn't necessarily a bad thing, it just means that you're going to be a bit more restricted in content with more enemies on a field at a time. With him being imaginary, his break is essentially damage mitigation and debuff extension, which means his teams can be lower maintenance when he can break. Now, based on the livestream, his skill deals single target imaginary damage, and his talent allows him to activate follow-up attacks based on his skill. The more debuffs the enemy has, the more likely he is to launch the follow-up attack. So more debuffs is more damage is more damage. His ultimate is a high damage single target attack, and they don't mention this in the livestream, but it looks like after using his ultimate he gains a damage buff. This could be a light cone effect, but we don't know as of making this video. The enemy also gets a debuff that makes it so that when an ally attacks that enemy, Dr. Ratio's follow-up attack will trigger. So there are ways to get his follow-up to trigger without necessarily having to RNG it. His technique outside of battle slows enemies, which is another debuff that helps his follow-up attacks trigger. Now, something that wasn't included in the livestream is that he buffs his crit rate and crit damage based on the amount of debuffs that enemies have. This is from the version preview page. I think they may be splitting up the information on purpose here to try to get people to go to their website. But there's different stuff for all of the characters that wasn't listed in the livestream, like Ruan Mei gives speed buff, and that wasn't said in the livestream. Anyways, Dr. Ratio buffing his own crit rate and damage is kind of a huge relief since my crit stats are absolutely dog shit. All of that is to say, he dishes out a ton of damage with follow-up attacks, as well as his skill and ultimate, and against single-target bosses, he'll likely be pretty dang strong. There's no way to say exactly how strong, but based on the new follow-up relics we have, the existence of Topaz, and most characters being stronger than the first release standard and limited characters, I expect Dr. Ratio to be pretty dang solid. Now, if you value a free education, you might be making him one of your main damage dealers. That means he'll need proper teammates and all of your money. But for those of us whose money is going to Acheron, we're gonna need some good free-to-play alternatives too. So let's go over all that. For light cones, obviously buying into his OnlyFans is going to be your best bet, but you can probably expect Topaz's light cone to be good for him as well, because it has a follow-up damage bonus. Against one target, I expect swordplay to be pretty good at high superimposition, and Seele's light cone is also such a good stat stick, I wouldn't be surprised if it was also top tier. Yensheng's light cone as well will likely be pretty solid. For 4 stars and free-to-play options, only Silence Remains at high superimpose will probably be good, because I mean it's just good with most hunts. Cruising in the Stellar Sea will also be pretty decent, and River Flows in Spring is as free to play as you can get. Swordplay with high superimposition with more than one target is still okay, but it is going to lose out on a lot of damage bonus. Those are the light cones that I expect to be pretty good, but we may see some other stuff come out of the woodworks. As for relics, I expect the imaginary set to be pretty solid on him if you can imprison enemies by pairing him with Welt or just by breaking them. It gives 40 crit value with the 4-piece, which is an absolutely insane bonus, but I will say for consistency, you'll likely want to also look into just 2 pieces of the imaginary damage set and 2 pieces of of the follow-up damage set. Other 2-piece sets include the attack bonus sets like Wild Wheat and Prisoner, and the speed bonus set will also be good with 2 pieces. As for planar ornament sets, we can expect Inert Salsado to be great for the crit, ult, and follow-up damage bonuses, but you also have Glamoth, which gives overall damage bonus just for having speed, and it tends to be best on most DPS, so I wouldn't be surprised if that one tops Salsado. Redolent Arena will also work great, and I expect Space Sealing Station to be decent, but to be the worst of the best options. I expect, like most other DPS, he's likely going to want crit on his chest piece, speed boots, imaginary damage orb, and an attack rope, but I would wait for my official build guide before you pre-farm relics for him, just because those are pretty iffy and it can depend on the amount of crit he gives himself. His build is pretty standard as far as DPS go. If you watched my other guides on DPS characters, you'll notice most of them have attack rope, most of them have an elemental damage orb, most of them have a crit body piece, and most of them have speed boots. I don't know, it's just the gold standard, I guess. Now, the last thing that you'll need to make Dr. Ratio an absolute powerhouse is a solid team. He has quite a few synergies with the current cast. As always, Bronya is going to be a top pick for him since she makes every DPS significantly better and puts the game on easy mode. But another character I expect to be a top pick is actually going to be Topaz, who can enhance follow-up attacks and even sometimes be an SP positive sub DPS. Her personal damage is actually pretty decent as far as a character that's supporting other characters goes. Dr. Ratio is going to be an SP negative DPS. What that means is that he's going to want to use his skill every single turn. So you'll want some SP positive supports like Hanya, who can increase his speed, attack, and damage dealt, and Lolcha, who can heal without skill points. You can also use Asta's basic attacks with a 3-turn ultimate on Cogs, but Tingyun will also be a more consistent support for him since you just use her skill once and then you can use her basic attack basically until he's attacked 3 times. Yukong is amazing for the crit bonuses she gives, but if he does give himself too much crit, then maybe Yukong will fall off a little bit. I would imagine she'd be good with him for the imaginary pairing, but we'll have to see. As always, Silverwolf is another perfect pair for hunt units, and she's great with Dr. Ratio, since you'll be bringing him into content that focuses on fewer enemies and higher HP on bosses. This will allow him to break more, and if you're using the 4-piece imaginary set, you'll be able to get a lot more damage. Single target DPS can use single target supports. That's what Silverwolf is all about. Welt is also going to be a great pair for him if you can manage the skill points, since he can provide 2 different debuffs on his own and also imprison enemies without breaking them, allowing for solid uptime on the 4-piece imaginary set. I also want to give a huge shout out to Gwynaifen for her vulnerability that she can inflict, and because she's adorable. Other supports aren't bad with him, but Memory of Chaos requires 2 teams, and characters like Pela who can debuff in an AoE will be more useful with AoE characters like destruction units. The main thing to consider with Dr. Ratio is that you're going to need at least 1 debuffer or someone that can inflict dots, so that way you can activate Dr. Ratio's follow-up attack consistently. But once you have that, he's basically just your standard DPS. All in all, Dr. Ratio is looking to be similar to our other hunt DPS in terms of the characters and build he'll use, and he certainly doesn't look bad. In fact, I expect him to be at least on the level of Seele, and despite some people's doom posting, she's still an insanely strong unit, and he may even be much stronger than her. I don't know, gang, we'll just have to see the numbers. Since he's not being moved to the standard banner and he was originally going to run as a limited character, I would imagine that his power level is at least decent. Let me know who you're pulling with the jades you were saving for Dr. Ratio, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.